In the early 1940s, Detroit, Michigan was teeming with ambition and industry. An ever-grinding city of factories, smoky jazz bars, and folks bustling toward the promise of a better tomorrow. It was a place shaped by the throbbing rhythms of machinery and the robust hum of dreams. On the 13th of May in 1943, within this heady world of motors and music, Mary Esther Wells was born. She arrived right at the heart of World War II, a time marked by both anxiety and a hopeful resilience. Although Detroit was known as the Motor City, it would soon spark a revolution in American culture known as Motown, a new style of music that fused the fervor of gospel, the heartache of the blues, and the celebratory energy of pop. For many Detroit families in the post-war era, there was a sense that anything was possible. Opportunity felt so near, yet remained elusive for anyone on the margins, especially an African-American girl child coming into a world still grappling with segregation and systemic poverty. Mary's family wasn't wealthy by any means, and she spent her early childhood dealing with profound struggles. At just 2 years old, she contracted spinal meningitis, and for a while, doctors feared she might never walk again. Though commonly mentioned, few realized the severity of that ordeal or the subsequent battles she faced regarding partial hearing issues and other complications that lingered. She survived, but the specter of illness taught her something early: how to remain determined in the face of adversity. Hers would be a story of resilience, physically, emotionally, and creatively. When Mary was still quite young, she found solace in music. Back then you could hear the call and response of gospel music floating out of churches on Sunday mornings. You might catch the spark of doo-wop harmonies swirling around corners where teenagers congregated, or the raw power of blues drifting from some late-night club on a busy thoroughfare. She heard it all. Even as a child, she was drawn to the idea that a voice, one single voice, could hush a crowd and draw them into a shared experience. It didn't matter if people were black or white, poor or well off. Music made them part of the same story, at least for a time. By her early teens, Mary was already belting out songs on neighborhood corners, sometimes for spare change. Friends recall that she wasn't shy about her ambition. When people complimented her voice, she'd flash a quick, confident smile and say, "You ain't heard nothing yet." Those who knew her back then talk about her polite demeanor mixed with a fierce spark in her eyes, as if she sensed she was destined for something big, though no one, not even Mary herself, could foresee just how big it might get. Detroit in the late 1950s was an incubator of talent. Singers like Jackie Wilson were making waves, while local entrepreneurs dreamed of turning the city into a hub for R&B. Perhaps no one dreamed bigger than a certain Berry Gordy Jr., who launched a record label he called Motown. Gordy's plan was to streamline music production the way Detroit streamlined manufacturing. He wanted to apply the same efficient assembly line approach that made Ford Motor Company famous, only with music. Legend has it that you could watch an unknown singer walk into Motown's Hitsville, USA building, and a few months later, see them emerge as a polished star. Mary wanted in on that dream. But how does a young singer break through? She was only 17 when she met with Gordy's team, carrying with her a song she'd written called Bye Bye Baby. She'd originally penned the tune for Jackie Wilson, hoping that Berry Gordy, who had worked with Wilson, might pass it along. But Gordy caught wind that Mary was more than just a songwriter. She had something else going for her, that pure, arresting voice. Many who heard it for the first time described it as having a sweetness that could wrap around a lyric, but it also had grit. It wasn't as rough and tremulous as some of the deeper blues vocals, nor was it as prim as certain pop stylings. Instead, it danced along that precarious line that Motown specialized in: raw emotion packaged with a sweetness that any audience could enjoy. It was so unbelievably catchy that, quite naturally, Gordy wanted to record Mary singing her own composition. In 1960, Mary became one of the earliest artists to join the Motown roster, a young label with big ambitions, but not yet an unstoppable hit machine. She was just 17 when Bye Bye Baby was released in September of that year. It was an immediate local favorite, eventually charting nationally and giving Mary a real shot at stardom. For a girl who had once battled polio and sang for coins on street corners, it felt surreal. She realized that all of the aches, the hospital visits, the quiet nights of scribbling lyrics in a diary, they were paying off. She'd found her launching pad. But that was just the start. In the early 1960s, Motown was shaping a brand identity distinct from the raw R&B of places like Chicago or Memphis. They were leaning toward a more polished, almost pop-infused R&B that could cross racial lines and scale the pop charts. Mary fit the mission perfectly. She sang with a sincerity that appealed to the emotional heartbeat of soul, yet also had enough clarity in her voice to resonate with mainstream pop audiences. Smokey Robinson saw this quality in her. He was a gifted songwriter and producer, as well as the lead singer of the Miracles, who were also forging their path in Motown's star-making factory. Smokey became Mary's mentor, co-writing or producing many of her early hits, including You Beat Me to the Punch, Two Lovers, and a slew of others that soared on both R&B and pop charts. The synergy between Smokey's writing and Mary's voice was uncanny, almost mystical. You Beat Me to the Punch, released in 1962, reached number one on the Billboard R&B chart, and cemented Mary's status as one of Motown's principal artists. Throughout the early 60s, Mary's star rose in parallel with Motown's. If you can imagine that era, especially in the United States, there was a major cultural shift happening. The civil rights movement was gathering momentum. African American performers were finally receiving broader coverage on radio stations that had previously been hesitant to play their music. The so-called British invasion loomed on the horizon. But before the Beatles took America by storm, Detroit's own wave, Motown, was rolling out unstoppable hits. In a world still segregated in many ways, Mary's voice was bridging gaps. Radio DJs, both black and white, found that playing her music garnered enthusiastic calls from listeners, regardless of race. She had that intangible quality that draws people into a song's story, making them forget their differences for 3 minutes. It was around this time that Mary got a chance to perform and tour with other Motown acts, traveling all over the country. These Motortown reviews, as they were called, provided an avenue for young black artists to reach new audiences. Yet it wasn't always smooth. Jim Crow, laws in the South, made touring extremely difficult. Artists faced segregated venues, sometimes performing for mixed-race crowds that had to be partitioned by a rope in the middle of the dance floor. Sometimes they confronted police intimidation, or they'd get turned away from restaurants and hotels. Mary, not yet 20, found herself learning to navigate a complicated, racially divided world from a tour bus full of equally driven performers. In some ways, it tightened the bonds between the artists. They were each other's support systems. Mary's bandmates recall her as gentle-hearted but feisty when it came to standing up for her rights. She wasn't afraid to call out an injustice, even if that made some venue owners uncomfortable. That flash of steel in her personality would later show itself in other ways. As her success soared, Mary began to experience a thrilling new level of fame in 1964 with the release of her signature hit, My Guy. Written by Smokey Robinson, it was a bouncy, endearing homage to unwavering devotion. The melody danced on a fine line between soul and pop, an ideal candidate for mainstream radio. Fans fell head over heels for it, catapulting it to the top of the pop charts. Mary's voice on that track was playful and sincere, a perfect expression of joy. Overnight, she found herself internationally famous. It was the kind of break every singer dreams of, having a crossover single that resonates beyond genre, generation, and racial lines. Few people know just how big My Guy became in terms of cultural resonance. In an age where black artists seldom soared to the summit of mainstream charts, Mary Wells managed it with seemingly effortless grace. The Beatles themselves publicly stated their admiration for Mary, even inviting her to open for them on a UK tour. Think about that for a second. Before the British invasion fully carved its name into American pop culture, Mary Wells was bridging the ocean. She was effectively introducing British audiences to Motown long before many of her colleagues had the same opportunity. Her pairing with the Beatles was unusual for the time, and it's said that she enjoyed their camaraderie. They apparently found her charming and witty, with that same confident spark. It's an often overlooked tidbit that Mary's early championing in the UK helped warm overseas audiences to Motown's entire roster. Yet, behind all the applause and gold records, Mary was grappling with personal and professional dilemmas. At the height of her success, she chose to leave Motown in 1964. It was a controversial move back then because who in their right mind walks away from a label that's just delivered a #1 hit? The answer, at least from Mary's perspective, was layered. Some accounts claim that she felt financially shortchanged by her contract, a complaint that would become more common as some Motown artists began to question how royalties and publishing rights were handled. Mary was also transitioning into adulthood, a newly famous star wanting more creative freedom and more input in the business side of her career. Other artists who stayed with Motown would occasionally mention Mary's departure with a tinge of regret, as if they felt something special was lost when she walked away from Berry Gordy's empire. And from Mary's vantage point, it was a leap of faith. She believed she could take her momentum and flourish as an independent entity. This is a pivotal juncture in Mary's story, one that often gets glossed over too quickly. On one hand, she was the Queen of Motown, or the First Lady of Motown, with a bright future ahead if she stayed. On the other, she wanted to challenge the status quo, get the best deal possible, and protect her artistic integrity. Some see this move as a cautionary tale. After leaving, Mary never quite reached the same commercial heights. She did sign with other labels, like 20th Century Fox and later Atco, but the synergy she'd had at Motown proved difficult to replicate. Some folks saw it as a tragedy that Mary, who arguably helped put Motown on the map, ended up overshadowed by younger acts like the Supremes, the Temptations, and Stevie Wonder, all of whom soared under Gordy's guidance. On the flip side, Mary's supporters believed she was pioneering something else, fighting for the type of contractual autonomy that would only become standard in the music industry decades later. It wasn't just her professional life that was tumultuous. Mary's romantic life also had its share of ups and downs. She married singer and band leader Herman Griffin early in her career, although the union didn't last long. Later, she married Cecil Womack, brother of the famed Bobby Womack. Again, the relationship was passionate but fraught. Mary had children, tried to balance motherhood with the demands of the entertainment industry, and wrestled with how to carve her own path. The constant stress and heartbreak found its way into her creative expression. Music was her therapy, a place she could pour out longing and frustration when words failed. As the 1960s wound down, Mary kept recording, but times were changing. Music was evolving. Psychedelic rock, heavier R&B, and funk were on the rise. Motown itself was shifting toward a more socially conscious sound, epitomized by Marvin Gaye and others. The British invasion had come and stayed, overshadowing many earlier 1960s American pop acts. Meanwhile, Mary tried to reinvent herself but struggled to score another smash. Some fans remember seeing her live performances from the late 60s and early 70s, remarking that her voice had matured into a huskier, more soulful instrument, a real treasure that wasn't always recognized by mainstream radio. She'd sing those older hits like My Guy, but now with a longing that seemed to reflect her personal disappointments. During the 1970s, Mary's life took yet more complicated turns, culminating in financial difficulties and near obscurity in the mainstream music scene. Occasionally, she'd pop up on a revival tour, or she'd do small club gigs that were well received by diehard fans. In interviews, she'd remain optimistic, insisting she had more music in her. But behind the scenes, it was a whirlwind of personal pain. There are stories of her dealing with depression, feeling that the industry she had helped pioneer had, in some sense, moved on without her. One often repeated anecdote is that whenever she heard a new Motown success on the radio by acts she'd once mentored or toured with, she'd get a melancholic smile on her face, then change the station. Whether that's myth or reality, it highlights the sense that Mary's life was bracketed by early success and later struggles to maintain relevance. For decades, her fans waited, hoping she might have a triumphant comeback, an album or a single that would remind the world why Mary Wells mattered so much to the soul of American music. She did try. Sporadically, she recorded new material throughout the 70s and 80s. Sometimes the results were lovely but overshadowed by disco or the new wave of pop and R&B. The music scene had changed. Mary had grown older, faced heartbreak and heartbreak's close sibling, disillusionment. A more hidden fact is that she also had health challenges across these years. The serious illnesses from childhood returned in new forms, and the stress took a toll on her physically and emotionally. One rarely told incident from the mid-1980s shows the hidden generosity in Mary's spirit. She had become part of a small philanthropic effort to help aspiring musicians in Detroit, quietly donating money and occasionally showing up at workshops to coach young singers. A longtime friend recalled how Mary would gently guide these kids through the nuance of delivering a line, telling them, "It's not about how high or loud you can get. It's about the feeling you put in each note." Even after the lights of stardom had dimmed, she recognized that music was about more than just hits and royalties. It was about passing the torch, about the intangible power of art to help the next generation find its footing. By the late 1980s, Mary had been diagnosed with laryngeal cancer. The singer, whose voice had once melted hearts, was now in a dire health crisis that threatened the very instrument that defined her life. Treatment was expensive. Because she had parted ways with Motown decades earlier, long before certain royalty reforms, her finances were precarious. She found herself struggling to pay medical bills, and it's said that many in the music community began rallying to support her. Former collaborators, fans, and even rival acts pitched in, a testament to the deep respect Mary still commanded among her peers. The image of Mary Wells, once called the First Lady of Motown, fighting for her life in a broken healthcare system, is a stark reminder of how fleeting fame can be. The irony is almost Shakespearean. She had soared to the heights of musical stardom, blazing a trail for countless others, yet faced a final chapter marked by financial hardship and personal pain. But true to form, Mary kept her spirits high, giving interviews whenever she had the stamina. In these late interviews, she sounded reflective, sometimes regretful, sometimes defiant. She talked about the pride she felt when hearing her old hits, about how she wished she could have handled certain professional decisions differently, and about the joy she found in her children and grandchildren. If you watch these interviews, you can see the spark in her eyes, that unbreakable sense that she was more than her circumstances. She was still Mary Wells, still fighting. She gave her final public performance in the early 1990s, though by then her voice was noticeably frail. On stage, fans saw glimpses of the youthful Mary that they remembered, her eyes still shining, trying to belt out the songs that once topped the charts. It was heartbreakingly beautiful. The cancer made it difficult for her to sing as robustly as before, but her presence was undeniable. People roared with approval, perhaps sensing it might be the last time they'd see her. Mary Wells passed away on July 26, 1992, at the age of 49. Her death stunned many who had grown up listening to her music. Even though she'd been ill for some time, her passing felt like the departure of a living link to Motown's foundational era. Motown by then had transformed into a legendary brand, known worldwide, a cultural phenomenon that had shaped American music. Mary had contributed immeasurably to that legacy. My Guy remains one of those enduring songs that transcends generations. It's often featured in film soundtracks, commercials, wedding receptions, any place that needs a shot of joyful romance. Yet as the years passed, Mary's name sometimes got lost amid the starrier, more mythologized figures from Motown. The irony is that without Mary's early successes, it's unlikely that the label would have achieved such a swift, unstoppable rise. Critics debate whether Mary could have maintained her superstar status if she'd stayed with Gordy. Some argue that Berry Gordy's close involvement and the Motown machine would have given Mary the structure and resources to build a massive catalog of hits. Others maintain that she was creatively stifled at Motown, and that leaving was an act of artistic liberation, albeit one that didn't pan out as she hoped financially. The truth might be somewhere in between. There's an emotional complexity here. Mary felt undervalued, but she also never fully replicated the synergy she had with Smokey Robinson and the Motown sound. That tension remains a subject of speculation among music historians, fans, and her family. Another long-standing debate is about the rightful credit for the origin of that cross-cultural appeal that Motown is famous for. Mary was crucial in bridging that gap, having scored chart toppers that appealed to a wide audience long before some other acts fully crossed over. And her successful tour in the UK with the Beatles suggests she played a significant role in introducing British audiences to the Motown brand. Nonetheless, the typical narrative in pop culture tends to highlight later Motown acts as the brand's ambassadors to the world. Historically, Mary doesn't always receive the same magnitude of recognition. This is an injustice that many music historians have been trying to correct. When fans look back at Mary Wells's life, there's a poignant sense of what if? What if she had negotiated a better contract without leaving Motown? What if the label had given her the same star treatment it lavished on others? Could Mary have soared even higher? Or would she have been overshadowed by the oncoming wave of acts like the Supremes, Marvin Gaye, and later Stevie Wonder? These open-ended questions make her story that much more compelling. It's a reminder that behind every star is a complex web of circumstances, decisions, and raw luck, both good and bad. Despite the heartbreak, Mary's journey has immense historical significance. She was among the very first African-American women to reach the top of the pop charts at a time when segregation was firmly in place. She walked a treacherous line between mainstream acceptance and authenticity, between individual ambition and collective responsibility. Her struggle for fairer compensation foreshadowed an era in which artists would start demanding and receiving better contracts, and she helped carve out that intangible path that future generations of soul and R&B singers would follow. Even if many only remember her for that one iconic tune, she nonetheless molded a corner of the music universe in her own image. Her story resonates far beyond music, too. It's a testament to perseverance. Think about it. She nearly died from illness as a child, yet rose to become one of the most loved voices of her generation. She took huge risks, both professional and personal, out of a desire for artistic control and fair representation. She might not have always come out on top, but she carried the weight of her choices with remarkable courage. That level of integrity is something that resonates profoundly in an age where many compromise for quick wins. Mary's was a longer, more arduous journey, but it was hers and hers alone. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time. See.